In one single night, the Emperor summoned me 9 times. When I was finally satisfied, the Emperor walked out of the bedroom holding his back. But 3 days later, I was diagnosed as pregnant. Everyone in the palace was shocked. However, on the day I gave birth, I ended up giving birth to 5 cats. The midwife assisting me fainted instantly. Only my personal maid looked at me in disbelief. "My lady, what is happening? How can there be 5 cats?" To that question, I also wanted to know the answer. How could a person give birth to cats? At that moment, footsteps echoed through the corridor. It seemed the Emperor had already arrived. But if he found out, surely my entire clan would be executed. Just then, someone knocked on the door. I was terrified. A year ago, together with 100 other maidens, I was taken to the arena. That day, the Emperor decreed that whoever gave the royal family an heir and gave birth to a prince would be named Empress. Thus began the struggle within the harem. In order to become pregnant, every possible method was tried, but none of them could conceive. Until 1 month later, concubine Lu, the least attractive among us, announced her pregnancy. The Emperor, overjoyed, elevated her rank. The following month, 9 other concubines also became pregnant. I was the last one to be diagnosed. While all the concubines prayed to bear a son, concubine Lu gave birth to a prince. Everyone believed the title of Empress was hers, but the Emperor executed her entire clan. The reason was that she had committed adultery, and the child was not of royal blood. One after another, the concubines gave birth, and one after another they were executed for the same crime. It turned out the Emperor himself, accompanied by the imperial physician and guards, waited personally outside the hall. As soon as a child was born, a blood test was performed. Although the others sought to become empress through pregnancy, I did not. So why did I give birth to 5 cats? Seeing that the Emperor was about to open the door, in desperation I grabbed the kittens that were climbing everywhere and handed them to my maid. In a low voice I ordered, "Hide the cats in the chamber pot." She quickly lifted the chamber pot in the corner and placed all 5 cats inside. But just as she closed the lid, the Emperor opened the door. He first looked at the midwife unconscious on the floor, then at my empty bed, and frowned. "What is happening? Where is my child?" Hearing this, I held my breath. I knelt before him and said, "Your Majesty, I have failed you." His expression darkened. "Explain how you have failed me." What I gave birth to after great effort was not a prince, but a huge and foul-smelling pile of excrement. The smell was so terrible that it made the midwife faint. The Emperor furrowed his thick brows and looked at me with a complicated expression. "Which imperial physician diagnosed your pregnancy?" It was Physician Shu. When I entered the harem, I had conflicts with concubine Jin, and Physician Shu was connected to her. I suspect he did it intentionally so that I would commit the crime of deceiving the Emperor. Since Physician Shu had already been executed, he was the perfect scapegoat. The Emperor glanced at the chamber pot in the corner with a pale face. "So all this time while I was waiting outside, you were relieving yourself?" Though embarrassed, I answered with difficulty. The Emperor looked at me with an unreadable expression. "Physician Gui, check the concubine's pulse. Verify whether what she says is true." Under the Emperor's severe gaze, I helplessly extended my hand for Physician Gui to examine my pulse. After a moment, the physician stroked his beard, frowned, and said, "Her pulse is rather peculiar." The Emperor raised an eyebrow. "What is peculiar about it?" "Although the concubine's pulse is somewhat weak, the beats are very strong. Her energy and blood do not show the deficiency typical after childbirth. On the contrary, they indicate great vitality." According to his words, my pulse was exactly what one would expect from a woman who had just given birth. I looked at the physician hopefully, wanting to kneel and thank him repeatedly. Upon hearing this, the Emperor's face became extremely serious. "The concubine has confused the royal bloodline and deceived the Emperor. This is a disgrace to the royal family. From today onward, her title is stripped and she is confined to the cold palace." I immediately knelt to thank him. "Thank you, Your Majesty, for your mercy." The joy of escaping death clouded my judgment. Together with my bewildered maid Wanning and the 5 little ones, I moved into the cold palace that very night. "Wanning, bring some rice soup. These little ones must be hungry." But no matter how we tried to feed them, the kittens refused to drink. Seeing them so helpless, Wanning looked at me hesitantly. "My lady, since they are your children, why don't you try feeding them your own milk?" A person breastfeeding cats, did that make any sense? But after all, they were my children. I could not let them starve to death. I expressed some milk into a bowl, and the 5 kittens, whose eyes had not yet opened, instantly drank it all. My life had always been spotless. The only time I had ever been with a man was that night with the Emperor, so why did I give birth to kittens? I reviewed every detail before and after the pregnancy. Had I come into contact with something strange? The only unusual thing was that before the night with the Emperor, in the royal garden, I had fed a completely white stray cat and given it half a pastry. Could it be that Cat had come to thank me by gifting me these 5 children? While I was reflecting, I heard a soft and tender voice say, "Mama." I thought I was hallucinating, but when I looked down, I was startled. The kittens, who moments before had been huddled together drinking milk, had transformed into 5 plump, pale babies. My hands trembled in fear, and Wanning screamed, "My lady, I must be hallucinating. I saw the cats turn into humans. Good heavens, was this some kind of joke?" Giving birth to kittens was already strange enough, but for them to transform into humans too? I rushed to the door and quickly shut it. Taking a deep breath, I turned around and touched the cheek of the nearest baby. It was soft and warm. In disbelief, I asked again, "You can talk?" The baby I had touched nodded his tiny head, stretched out his little arms, and said, "Mama, I want you to hug me." The 5 kittens had not only turned into humans, but they already knew how to speak from birth. But whether they were cats, spirits, or humans, they were now my children. In the following days, life in the cold palace became hectic. As a first-time mother, I could barely keep up. They grew very quickly. In just 15 days, they could already walk and jump. But I warned them seriously that no matter what happened, happened. They must never leave our palace. Outside the cold palace, the story of concubine Lin giving birth had become the laughingstock of the kingdom. The mockery within the harem never ceased. Have you heard? Concubine Lin was so desperate to become pregnant that for 10 whole months she called a belly full of excrement her child. Hearing this, Wanning stomped angrily on the ground. But I felt it was a small price to pay. I no longer had to compete for the emperor's favor or involve myself in schemes. Though life was humble, with my 5 little ones, it was rather peaceful. But that night, the 5 children disappeared. Terrified, Wanning and I searched frantically throughout the cold palace. If anyone discovered them, we were doomed. Just as I was about to cry from despair, the eldest and second child returned carrying a basket of food filled with exquisite pastries and steaming soup. The third and fourth dragged a sack full of white rice, while the fifth tightly held a delicate wooden box. When I stepped closer to look, my legs nearly gave out. Isn't this the imperial seal? Where did you get this? The little one puffed out his chest proudly, wanting praise. We went to find food for Mama. We saw this shiny stone and thought it was pretty, so we brought it for you to play with. I nearly blacked out. Something to play with? This was something that could get 9 entire clans executed. Just then, Wanning stumbled in. My lady, disaster! They say the imperial seal has been stolen, and the emperor is searching every palace with his guards. They've already arrived at the entrance of the cold palace. I was horrified, but before I could react, a loud bang sounded, and the dilapidated doors of the cold palace were kicked open. The emperor entered with a large group of guards. With a gloomy expression, he swept his gaze across the courtyard, first stopping at the basket of pastries, then the sack of rice that did not belong to the cold palace, and finally fixing his eyes on the imperial seal lying on the floor. My legs weakened and I collapsed to my knees. It was over. I had been caught with the evidence. This time they would truly cut off my head. The emperor frowned deeply, his face twisted with anger, and slowly walked toward me. Tell me, what does this mean? Why is my imperial seal in your possession? I thought about taking all the blame myself to beg mercy for my 5 children, but when I turned my head, I saw that they had transformed back into 5 kittens and were hiding in the corner, huddled together and trembling. At least they still knew fear. I began to cry out in a trembling voice, Your Majesty, judge wisely. I don't know either. I had gone to sleep when I heard noises outside. I came out to look, and these things were already in the courtyard. Surely the thief. Upon seeing the palace being searched, threw the stolen items here either to distract everyone or to frame me. As I spoke, I repeatedly struck my forehead against the ground, trying to appear as sincere as possible. But before the emperor could say anything, a sweet voice rang out beside him. Oh dear Sister Lin, what a hole-filled lie you tell. The one speaking was the imperial concubine, who was currently highly favored. Her father was the prime minister, and her position in the harem was extremely influential. Several concubines who had once enjoyed the emperor's favor had conflicted with her and ended up either insane or dead. Even though I lived in the cold palace, rumors said the title of empress would belong to her. To offend her was like receiving a death sentence. I looked at her and did not dare speak. The imperial concubine continued mockingly, How curious that the thief chose precisely your cold palace as a hiding place. In my opinion, concubine Lin, resentful for having been confined here, stole the imperial seal herself. She should be executed immediately. Me, a banished concubine? What had I ever done to her? If she wanted to compete for the emperor's favor, why destroy someone insignificant like me? Hearing the imperial concubine's words, the emperor's face became even more severe. I felt as though I had fallen into an icy abyss. This time, there was no escape. With his brows tightly furrowed, the emperor angrily flicked his sleeves. A disgrace to the royal family. Punish her until death. The guards roughly seized me. Terrified, I instinctively looked toward the corner where my 5 little ones had been, but they had disappeared. Panic overwhelmed me. If I died, they could be beaten to death like stray cats. But at that moment, a familiar voice sounded beside me. Don't hurt my mama.